starring Danielle Savre, Rob Mays, Michael Beach, Nathan Lynn. Written by Erik Patterson, Hans Rodionoff, Jessica Scott. Directed by Darin Scott. Why does this movie exist? I have no idea. I mean, yeah, I get that it exists to fleece fans of Renny Harlin's dumb but fun 1999 shark opus by putting a cheaper, blander carbon copy on the market with a recognizable title designed to sucker viewers in. Other than that, Deep Blue Sea 2 does absolutely nothing to justify its own existence. A sequel, prequel, remake, reboot, whatever, should do something, anything, creatively to justify why it was made, and one would assume do it in entertaining enough fashion to warrant further milking the moniker for even more money. There should be some fresh take on the material, some extension of the original concept, something that takes things, dare I say, deeper. Deep Blue Sea 2 can't be bothered. It is nothing more than the exact same movie as the original with a few minor tweaks to the premise, characters, and familiar scenes done on a much lower budget, offering nowhere near the amount of shock and/or schlock value as its predecessor. First of all, there are barely any shark attacks. Think about that for a second. A sequel to Deep Blue Sea with 5 full-sized sharks that barely make their presence known. The sharks frequently let the people in the water swim unscathed. I ask again, why does this movie exist? Floating sea lab out in the ocean. Questionable scientific experiments on sharks. Smarter sharks break loose. Station floods. People try to escape submerging station without getting eaten. Sound familiar? The very similar plot this time focuses on a cast of characters who could be most easily described as not Saffron Burrows, not Sam Jackson, not Thomas Jane, and not Michael Rappaport. And these characters are exactly the same as their counterparts from the nearly 20-year-old original, yet there is no mistaking which actor, character they're supposed to remind you of. Calling the new versions of these characters one-dimensional is putting it mildly. More like half-dimensional. Not Thomas Jane barely even registers as a character. Late in the movie he mentions being ex-military, and it hit me that really was the first and only thing we ever learned about him outside functioning as a buff shark wrangler. He's quite literally just there, to be there at the times he needed to be there. The premise itself merely takes circumstances from the original and put a mild tweak on how it plays out. In this case, rich dude not Sam Jackson recruits cleavage-bearing sexy shark scientist not Saffron Burrows to travel to his floating compound to assist with his carcharodon experiments. Last time it was using mako sharks to find a cure for Alzheimer's. This time bull sharks are used to create nootropic drugs that will boost human intelligence so that mankind can evolve and not become obsolete when artificial intelligence takes over the world. A notion not Sam Jackson lectures about so many times it began to feel less like that character's driving obsession and more like the writers realizing they have virtually nothing else for him to say or do. Not Sam Jackson has already begun taking some of these smart shark drugs, leading to nothing more than another character claiming they're making him increasingly erratic. Except we barely see any erratic behavior from him. He's actually one of the calmest and most level-headed when the threat begins, lapsing into douchey bad guy mode only when convenient. Not Saffron Burrows outright states mid-movie, "I'm not sure why you brought me here." I was wondering the same thing. The reason given only pounds home that there was no reason for her to be there other than so that all the other characters could explain to her what was going on there before. She began explaining to them why things were going wrong there and then arguing endlessly with not Sam Jackson about why what he's doing is crazy and going to get everyone killed there. Her knowledge of sharks is almost never put to any practical life-saving use. Honestly, a locksmith would have saved more lives in this scenario than any scientist. About the only creative spin put on the recycled plot starts out promising only to prove to be yet another uninspired idea in this lifeless rehash. The main lab shark gives birth to voracious mutant baby sharks that are described as being like super piranhas, but worse. It quickly becomes apparent these tiny sharks were just an excuse to save money by having people in cramped, half-flooded corridors chased by something that's more cost-effective to visualize, usually just bubbling water, and easier to shoot around than a full-size shark. I actually began to feel bad for the writers and director because the whole thing should have simply been credited on the screen as written and directed by the producer's notes. Imagination feels stifled at every turn, a more talk than action recycling in the lamest, dullest, dull-witted, low-rent manner possible. Competently made but in the service of absolutely nothing. Remember LL Cool J's ridiculously entertaining, deepest, bluest, My Hat Is Like a Shark's Fin rap song that put a campy exclamation point on the livelier original? How hard would it have been to hire a rapper to croon an equally silly ditty along those lines for the sequel? Instead we are subjected to opening credits set to a melancholy lounge act number about the deep blue sea, more befitting a romantic mermaid movie from the 1960s. In retrospect, this song perfectly sets the stage for the no-fun film to follow. If you loved Hollow Man 2, you'll love Deep Blue Sea 2. Nobody loved Hollow Man 2. Starring Kim Milford, Cheryl Smith, Johnny Russo, Roddy McDowall, Keenan Wynn, directed by Charles Band, distributed by Full Moon Features. Charles Band is a producer who might not always, or ever, have the budget necessary to bring his cinematic visions to extraordinary life, but any viewer can see ambition leaking off the screen. His output via Empire Pictures and Full Moon Features is a hodgepodge of high-concept films primarily within the horror and sci-fi genres, nearly all of which are shining examples of how to stretch a buck. He was to the 80s and 90s as Roger Corman was to the 60s and 70s. Long before either of his infamous production companies came to pass, Band worked under the Irwin Yablans company to create one of his most notoriously cheesy lo-fi features, Laser Blast, 1978. Set and shot in the barren desert of Southern California, this threadbare feature has made many a worst-of-list been the subject of parody, and often occupies a subterranean spot on IMDb's lowest-rated films. But the thing is, it's not all that bad. Sure, it's bad, in the conventional sense that acting is subpar, with a couple notable exceptions, the story is standard fare, the plot is shaky, and the direction is lacking. However, despite all of these red flag deficiencies, the movie itself is an entertaining 70s affair for aficionados of B-grade sci-fi and stop-motion animation, which is definitely the film's saving grace. After an opening in which a humanoid is vaporized by a couple of laser blast and stop-motion aliens way out in the sun-baked desert, we are introduced to Billy, Kim Milford, a chill SoCal dude who mostly lives alone since his mom is constantly traveling. Billy's only close relationship is with Kathy, Cheryl Smith, his girlfriend who lives with her eccentric grandfather, Colonel Farley, Keenan Wynn. Although the town is sparsely populated, Billy still finds himself being harassed not only by the local cops, who enjoy getting high on their own confiscated supply, but also by Chuck, Mike Bobenko, and Froggy, Eddie Deason, a couple of local bullies. Billy drives off into the desert to get away from it all, and during his escapade he finds both the arm cannon and necklace previously worn by the now vaporized humanoid. He lets off some steam by blowing shit up in the vacant, vast desert. What Billy doesn't know is the aliens from earlier are able to track his new weapon, and now they're headed back to Earth. Also on his tail is Tony Craig, Johnny Russo, a government agent interested in getting his hands on alien tech. Plus, Billy found has caused a reaction with his skin, spurring a growth that gets ugly enough for him to pay drive. Mellon, Roddy McDowell, a visit. The doc takes a sample and offers to have it examined further, but a late-night tragedy prevents that from happening. Billy is changing, and not for the better, transforming into a humanoid similar to the one seen in the opening. Kathy may be his only hope for salvation, but the deck is stacked against Billy's chance for survival. Look, there are massive plot holes and gaps in logic here, but I can't say any of that prevented me from enjoying this low-budget attempt. For one thing, the stop-motion animation aliens vastly elevate this film from what it could have been. Their design comes courtesy of an uncredited Randall William Cook, whom most horror fans will know as the man responsible for bringing The Creatures of the Gate 1987 and Mad Men 1989 to life. The aliens look like bipedal turtles without a shell, and their use of a foreign language and the level of detail seen in the design shows a level of care and quality not glimpsed anywhere else in the film. Their actions are a bit confusing, though. In the opening, the aliens kill the humanoid, whom we can later assume was a normal person changed by the necklace, but leave the gun and necklace. Then later they return to Earth after Billy activates the items. Why not grab them after disintegrating the humanoid? It isn't as though they were in a rush or under fire or anything. It's best not to try bringing logic to the table here, because the story looks like Swiss cheese when held up to any sort of scrutiny. Aside from the aliens forgetting to collect the items they're clearly after, there is also the issue of how and why the necklace has the effect of mutating its wearer, or why it seems like it only changes Billy at night, until the moment when it doesn't and he's running around like a daylight ghoul, blowing up everything in sight. How exactly is the government involved here? Does anyone other than the cast even live in this town? And let's not even discuss the bizarre ending. In terms of acting, well, also don't expect a whole lot. Wynn is a goddamn legend, and here he's doing what he does best, chewing scenery with reckless abandon. McDowell is always a pleasure to watch, though his role here is limited. The biggest kick I got was seeing Eddie Deezen make his screen debut as a bully of all things. Deezen, who embodies every quality of a stereotypical nerd and probably weighs 98 pounds soaking wet. Seriously, Milford isn't such a bad actor, but the material he's given doesn't allow for much to showcase. To be fair, nobody has that chance here, but that's part and parcel of the charm these low-budget sci-fi pictures possess. Once the film moves past an extremely rough opening shot, the 1.85:1 1080p image isn't nearly as weak as some might expect. The overall aesthetic certainly fits within the range of expectations viewers may have, appearing as it might have on dollar theater screens back in 1978. Color temp fluctuates slightly throughout, though colors themselves have a tiny bit of pop and look accurate. Film grain is moderate, and while it does get a little ugly during nighttime scenes, there are only 1 or 2 scenes taking place at that time. The print shows some minor dirt and damage, nothing too egregious. Contrast is decent enough, and, again, since about 90% of the film takes place during the day, it allows for greater detail and depth to be glimpsed. Unfortunately, the only audio options are lossy, with an English Dolby Digital 2.0 and 5.1 surround soundtracks available. The activity from rear speakers is limited, mostly for ambiance than anything else, so the stereo track offers something a bit more focused and faithful to the original mono mix. Either way, the sound shows its age with plenty of crackling on the high end and a faint but there hiss that permeates pretty much the entire track. That manages to get worse at some points during the third act. On the plus side, the score by Richard Band and Joel Goldsmith, son of Jerry, is a synth lover's wet dream, delivering all the electronic cues and pulsing bass with a genuine old-school sound. Dialogue is always clear and often balanced well within the mix. There are no subtitles. The only real extra here is an audio commentary with director Charles Band and composer Richard Band. Vintage trailers are included for Cinderella, Crash, The Day Time Ended, End of the World, Fairy Tales, Mansion of the Doomed, and Tourist Trap. Special features, audio commentary with director Charles Band and composer Richard Band, vintage trailers starring Jessica Boss, Lena Roma, David Abramsky, Daniel Felix de Weldon, written and directed by Mike Boss. Anonymous 616 could be course study in a class or clinic devoted to filmmakers looking to make a big impression on a small budget. Basically, it fits the early Blumhouse model. Anonymous 616 utilizes a single location and a small cast. It's driven by compelling characters and a knockout story, emphasizing substance over style. At the same time, skillful camera work and a solid understanding of important techniques give this micro-budget production a professional aesthetic. Barring a single instance of an outdated morphing effect, it could go straight to big screens, a rarity that could find company with films like The Blair Witch Project and The First Paranormal Activity. Since Anonymous 616 is based on a very straightforward premise with a crucial turning point, I'm hesitant to reveal any plot points beyond the film's official synopsis as revealed on IMDb. A reunion between two couples becomes a massacre. When one of the guests meets an anonymous person online and willingly becomes a participant on a bloody path to becoming godlike. The opening will remind well-viewed genre fans of films like The Invitation and Coherence. Like these examples, Anonymous 616 is set at a dinner party amongst a diverse assortment of friends with connections both solid and tenuous. There's a smattering of cultural background along with subtle differences in economic standings and social status. It seems like the kind of common gatherings we've all attended, but there's a dark undercurrent from the get-go, along with dualities and juxtapositions hinting at potentially explosive combinations. The film hinges on the actors portraying complex and compelling characters with emotional legitimacy, and these aren't easy roles to play. That's why no review of Anonymous 616 would be complete without giving due praise to the film's four leads, Jessica Boss, Lena Roma, David Abramsky, and Daniel Felix de Weldon. These may not be full-time actors with name recognition, but all deliver performances that are nothing short of professional. Many micro-budgets suffer from using actors they can afford as opposed to thespians who can truly deliver. This cast delivers. Bella Shepherd also excels in a supporting yet integral role. Anonymous 616 has a second-act twist that produces a potential telescoping of reality, one that caused this reviewer to question everything. The story of a misunderstanding with fatal consequences, or perhaps an episode of PTSD, seem like easy subterfuge for hidden subtexts that leads straight into the Matrix, metaphorically speaking. It's open-ended enough for inquisitive minds to detect everything from supernatural intrusions to MK Ultra-level experimentations. Anonymous 616 becomes a petri dish for germinating conversations about the root causes of war, not to mention the devastating power of paranoia and its combustibility when paired with extreme narcissism and alcohol. While the filmmaker's intentions are clear, it doesn't disallow for creative interpretations. If anything, it rewards them. Anonymous 616 offers the kind of genuine, psychological suspense that will appeal to fans of They Look Like People and the Creep movies. It's anchored by a crackling script filled with stories within stories, not unlike Reservoir Dogs or Bullet Head, a recent favorite of mine. And despite the small budget, Anonymous 616 delivers serious substance with enough gore to please a fan of torture porn, without thoroughly alienating fans of character-driven horror cinema. Besides the previously mentioned outdated morphing effect, Anonymous 616 leaves little to criticize in terms of serious impediments to its delivery. As for constructive criticism, were the film picked up for re-release by a bigger studio with distribution, for example, I'd recommend looking for a more compelling title, as Anonymous 616 barely hints at the most compelling aspects of the film. It highlights the techno-terror aspect, but this is more a plot motivator than an exploration of technology like Unfriended or Chain Letter. I'd also trimmed the climactic exposition by at least 60%. While Pastor Warren, played by Miles Cranford, is a compelling and effective last-minute arrival, I'm certain that viewers who make it to the end will already suspect what's really going on. The citing of specific biblical passages doesn't add anything at this stage of the story. Anonymous 616 will be best enjoyed by fans of slow-burn, character-driven storytelling with an appreciation for, and an understanding of the nature of micro-budget films. In this case, especially, cheap doesn't equal fake or ineffective by any measure, and it never suffers from a lack of recognizable names and faces. Anonymous 616 won't appeal to a lot of people, especially those thrilled by jump scares and crazy special effects, along with those looking for monsters or specters, phantoms or Cenobites. It's drama first, extreme horror second, but intelligent and skillfully textured throughout. Anonymous 616 is available to watch now on Amazon. Click here. Summary: if you're a fan of micro-budget, character-driven genre offerings like The Invitation and They Look Like People, chances are, you'll enjoy this one as well. As opposed to those films, however, Anonymous 616 offers a hefty dose of extreme horror with elements of torture porn, bravely venturing into some truly dark territories. Not for the easily triggered and definite, not for the kiddies. Starring Johnny Galecki, Anna Friel, Oliver Platt, Kevin J. O'Connor. Written by Bobby Miller, directed by Bobby Miller. Director Bobby Miller first came to my attention with his 2010 short film Tub, which followed a man who impregnates his bathtub after masturbating while taking a shower. Quirky but emotional, it cemented Bobby Miller as a name that I needed to keep an eye out for. The Cleanse marks his feature-length debut, and it's a wonderfully quirky tale of acknowledging our past and learning to let go. Paul Galecki is a heartbroken man who can't seem to get his life on track after losing his job and being stood up at the altar. On late-night TV, he sees an ad for a spiritual retreat that promises to help those who participate. One of 4 people who make the cut for the retreat, Paul and the others each drink 4 jars of some strange liquid that is made just for them. At the end, each vomits profusely and gives birth to an odd creature that grows over the course of the retreat. As things become more outlandish, Paul and Maggie Friel have to figure out how they are going to get out of this bizarre situation. Featuring elements of black comedy, surreal fantasy, and straight-up creature horror, The Cleanse is one of the more original films I've seen this year. After all, how often do we get to see a man take care of a creature, a manifestation of his inner negativity, born of his own vomit? Were it not for the wonderful creature effects by Nicholas Podbree and Werner Pretorius, these creatures really are disgustingly adorable. I don't know if this film would work as well as it does. Bolstered by wonderful acting from everyone involved, The Cleanse clocks in at a tight 80 minutes and has a witty, strikingly funny first act, and an even second act that retreads ground already established, and a third act that ends abruptly, almost shockingly so, although it certainly brings the goods for those who are craving a creature design that harkens to Carpenter's The Thing. The combination of these three acts ends up with a film that, even though it's relatively short, feels like it would actually do better as an extended short film, one that lasts about 45 or so minutes. While the acting is certainly delightful across the board, some of the characters feel underdeveloped and strangely unnecessary, such as Eric Kyle Gallner, and his girlfriend Lori, Diana Bang, whose purpose is to introduce some immaturity and resentment, respectively. If they are meant to show what happens when you don't go along with the program, then I feel like there could have been a less hit-you-on-the-head way of doing so. Tale about holding on to the past and only being able to let it go once you recognize that it has the ability to hurt others, especially those who you might see a future with. The cleanse is unflinchingly honest, even though it knows that it might hurt. Couple that raw candor with some smart humor and fantastic creature designs and you've got yourself a film that's well worth seeking out.